I rise today to seek unanimous consent for 8 to 9 nominees to critical State Department posts. Each of them moved through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee with bipartisan support, and the only reason the Senate has not confirmed them is due to the political obstinacy of a couple of my Republican colleagues. And the evidence of that is that when we have a vote, as we had earlier today for the Assistant Administrator of AID, it passed 59 to 40. 59 to 40. We've heard many complaints about the management of the State Department and the conduct of U.S. foreign policy in recent months. And while the State Department is not a perfect institution, for that fact, no institution is, its leadership was decimated by the prior administration. The assistant secretaries and ambassadors who should be participating in the rebuilding of the institution and the development and implementation of U.S. foreign policy are instead languishing on the Senate floor. Dozens. Nominees who should be the face of the United States at international organizations like the United Nations, NATO, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, are instead waiting for the Senate to act. The government of the People's Republic of China is watching, even though the majority of this body has recognized that the government of China represents the greatest geopolitical challenge to the United States. We are letting China eat our lunch on the world stage. Our Republican colleagues have spoken at length in opposition to this administration's handling of the situation in Afghanistan. But they refuse to allow the Senate to vote on nominees who are critical to dealing with the refugee situation resulting from the U.S. withdrawal and the much-needed stabilization efforts. By the way, a withdrawal that was already pre-cooked by the Trump administration when it made a surrender deal with the Taliban that said, we will leave on a date certain, we will release thousands of Taliban prisoners, which they did to the Taliban who became fighting soldiers. We ultimately will not only leave at a date certain, but we have done nothing to get any of the promises that the Taliban made enforced. And we reduce our troop level dramatically. That's what President Biden inherited. Now, I've heard a lot about the handling of the situation in Afghanistan, but my colleagues refuse to allow the Senate to vote on nominees who are critical to dealing with the refugee situation resulting from that withdrawal and the much-needed stabilization efforts. Nominees being held by Republicans include the Assistant Secretary of State for Population, Refugees, and Migration, the Assistant Secretary for Conflict and Stabilization Operations. That cannot stand. And for all the talk of needing to work with our allies and partners, how does holding our nominees to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel or the U.S. ambassador to Canada actually advance U.S. interests? It does not. It is seriously detrimental to our national security. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent. Before I ask unanimous consent, I understand Senator Schumer would like to speak prior to these UC requests, and I'm happy to yield to the majority leader.
Brief remarks.